A movie's coming out. I have to play into the algorithm. Shang Chi had a trailer. We'll talk about him today. Alright, we're going to go back to the 70s. That's where we start with Shang Chi. Now, Shang Chi is a kind of weirdly obscure Marvel character. But there actually is pretty good reason on why he was obscure. As weird as it is. As weird as it is. How the hell did this character become obscure? Well, okay, you know, he probably didn't have a short series. Wait. Oh, hold it. He actually lasted about 125 issues. And I should mention, while technically he did take over a numbering for a comic around issue 15 or 17, depending on how you want to count it, that meant that Shang-Chi was an Asian character, a solo character, who lasted 110 issues at minimum. That's pretty big, actually. Not to mention the specials and everything else. How did this character become obscure? Well, there's a story. Let's actually start with Shang-Chi's creation to an extent and who he was created. So, we're back in the 1970s. And let's talk about why Shang-Chi was created for more or less. Bruce Lee was popular. Martial arts movies. They were a huge thing back then. And Bruce Lee, the Kung Fu craze, was a real thing. It was a huge deal, and while Shang-Chi was created for that, compared to a lot of others like Richard Dragon, Iron Fist, he was able to keep a title for a long-ass time. So let's talk about it. He was created by Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin. This duo would create this character, and he was created for one reason, and this is also the reason he got obscure. And this is also going to talk about controversial territory here, so I'm just going to give kind of like a warning. Any images I show are for context and educational purposes here. If these are to talk about them in a manner, they're not right, and no one should be depicted like this today. It's a thing. I'm here to just talk about it because it's part of the character's history. Cool? Okay, got it. Now, with that said, let's talk about Fu Manchu. If you don't know who Fu Manchu is,
he's the clown in the road, stands about 7'2".
it's complicated, and I'll just say what it is. So, have you ever watched an old movie series and noticed like these mystical Chinese villains with the mustaches and everything else? Yeah, a lot of them are based on Fu Manchu, who was a villain created for a novel series by Sax Rohman. What happened with this was that Marvel was able to get the license to the character, and to connect it in the Marvel Universe, they gave him a son named Shang Chi, who is a superhero kung fu character, essentially. I mean, he's not technically a superhero, I guess, but, you know, we'll not worry about that now. Who fights against his father for justice and to overthrow him and be a good guy. Shang-Chi is kind of basic in that way, but it made his comic work. And this is also one of the reasons why Shang-Chi had a problem as a character. He's technically a weirdly licensed spin-off character. Marvel owns him outright, but they don't owe Fu Manchu the father. So, yeah, that was a problem. Let's talk about more about him and his history overall, just so you guys know about him. When Shang-Chi was created, he was created in the 1970s as their major kung fu character. Marvel created a bunch of others too, like Iron Fist, the Sons of the Tiger, White Tiger, Daughters of the Dragon, and various other obscure ones you're never going to hear me talk about probably unless I'm really drunk and or sad or really just want to talk about them. You might hear me talk about them. But the kung fu craze was a huge thing in the 70s, so a lot of characters were created to capitalize on it. DC even did its own with, like I said, Richard Dragon and the Karate Kid. Yes, not the Ralph Macchio movie. There's a DC Comics Karate Kid. This is the reason why the Karate Kid movies have a DC Comics license. Anyway, Shang-Chi himself was the major kung fu character. And he never got as big as Iron Fist because of some of the limitations about him. For one, he just wasn't used in the wider Marvel universe as much. He had guest star appearances. Like, you can find them scattered throughout his entire history of a character, but never major ones, and he never developed a huge relationship with major Marvel characters. Iron Fist got together with Luke Cage, and they kind of became the buddy duo of the Marvel Universe. Man, Luke Cage, you're my best friend. Yeah, Iron Fist, I'm your best friend. And they have wacky, money hunting adventures. I love Heroes for Hire. It's a great title. I love it. Iron Fist is cool. So's Luke Cage. Fuck Netflix. But moving on from those whole things, Shang-Chi was created for that reason of being a major kung fu hero for the Marvel Universe. And when he started out, it was kind of simple. Steve Englehart was writing, Jim Starlin was on it. And what happened was, early in his career, Jim talked to an Asian friend, and he didn't like the depictions in the comic. So Jim left. And Steve Englehart also left the title, but Shang would get a major creator, and his was Doug Monk. Doug Monk is a weird creator to talk about. A lot of people don't consider him that big a creator, but he was around for a long time. I was reading, guys started out in the 70s, and I was still reading comics from him in the 90s and 2000s. Again, not a guy who was gone for a long time, actually, and it's been around. And another artist named Paul Gulacy, who is also a really good artist. Love his stuff. And they took over Shang-Chi, and the title was good. So Shang-Chi is kind of like, let's kind of explain this whole thing. The reason that you like the Shang-Chi comic is that it's kind of a lower end of like fantasy kung fu story. Iron Fist is like, yo, I have chi magic punching dragon powers. Shang actually has, martial arts training. Now it's a little fantastic at points like anything else, but that's really the case with the character. He's kind of lower end, it's spycraft, all that jazz. In fact, he also has some pretty fun, villains. Have you ever heard of a character called Razor Fist? The guy has knives for hands, and this is one of Shang-Chi's enemies, along with Fu Manchu and his minions. The comic is really good. Now, I'm also going to be honest here. When a lot of people get into characters or comics, they want a good modern run. And I understand. You want to read something that is not old or outdated. Yeah, here's the problem with Shang-Chi. His best run is his original run. It just is. There's more of it. There's a lot of it. And it had a consistent creator work on him. If you're going to get into this character, his 110 issue run or so, plus specials, is the best solution for this character, sad to say. You're not going to get anything better for this character at this point. Now, other creators have worked on him. There have been other miniseries, and they're okay. And I know, like, people are like, hey, I want to read newer stuff. Shang-Chi isn't in a lot of newer stuff, sad to say. He's in some, not a lot. And the reason why is mostly the licensing issues that are involved with the character. Once Marvel lost the license, Shang-Chi was not used for a fuck ton long time. The guy went almost years, decades without an appearance. And with that said, it's just kind of been hard for the character to kind of come back. Like, the major thing he did in the 80s. You want to know what the most major thing he did in the 80s was? I'll tell you. Have you ever heard of G.I. Joe? So at one point, Marvel owned G.I. Joe, the license straight out. And to have more content for the UK division, the UK was printing a G.I. Joe comic called Action Force. That was what they were calling G.I. Joe back there, because we're not going to call the American Army team G.I. Joe in the UK. This is just something they did for markets back in the day with G.I. Joe. What happened was they decided to reprint Shang-Chi comics in Action Force to fill out the title, since Action Force was weekly. So Shang-Chi was established to be the mentor of G.I. Joe member Quick Kick. Weirdest little connection to the Marvel Universe. Did you also know that at one point Rocky Balboa was supposed to be part of G.I. Joe? Yeah, funny how things work sometimes. Funny how things work. So, this isn't an entire history of the character. This is more of a recommendation. So, I'm just going to tell you what I recommend from Shang-Chi. And here's the thing. The movie's probably not going to follow it entirely, but I always like thinking about, like, what to recommend people if they're getting into a character. And I'm going to say this. You might not like it, but I do think the 70s run is where you go. Now, does it have problems? Yeah. Look, there are a lot of great action shonen fighting comics out there nowadays. Like, honestly, Fist of the North Star, still one of the best. Dragon Ball. Even Marvel has published higher quality action kung fu stuff in recent years. I still recommend Immortal Iron Fist to people as one of the best comics of the 2000s. It's really good, people. I like it a lot. Shang-Chi doesn't have that great modern run because of how limited he is. He's had miniseries, some revivals and stuff. Because of that connection to Fu Manchu, and honestly, one of the reasons they probably don't like using that connection is because Fu Manchu is kind of established to be a racist stereotype nowadays.
Is confusing.
It is confusing. Say your goddamn pronouns.
And I kind of agree. It was used a lot back in the day, pretty badly for some people, and you know what? It's a very old thing. Like, we should kind of just move on from it. But I get it. He's not a character who exactly is was created the most sensitive time. And that's kind of what's held back the character more than anything. Just not having that connection, and also having that connection. But I'll tell you what's cool about Shang-Chi as a comic. In the 70s, it has this great atmosphere. There's some great early work from Jim Starlin. Paul Gulacy is able to draw the fuck out of fight scenes sometimes. And honestly, who doesn't love a villain called Razor Fist? His name is Razor Fist, and he has knives for hands. I'm kind of being a little ironic there, but I actually honestly do like Razor Fist a lot. But I really think you should give it a shot if you want to get into the character. With the movie coming out, I understand you might not want to check it out and focus on the movie. But if you really want to understand where this character comes from, the history and the context of him, and to have a pretty solid opinion on him and maybe what he is, check out the old comics. They're kind of fun. I promise. I swear. Anyway, this is the quick little thing on Shang-Chi. Next time, maybe I'll do a graphic novel or two. Or 3. We'll see. See you next time.